Ju-Han is a low-rank hunter who was tricked into taking on a mission he couldn't possibly survive by a man named Taejun Kwon, and now he finds himself faced with his team having been absolutely massacred by a giant snake monster, and he's next on the menu. To his credit, he does put up a really good fight against that thing, but his strength just isn't good enough because his sword snaps, and despite his best efforts to avoid getting eaten, he still ends up getting his legs chewed on by the snake monster, and at that point, he knew it was over for him. He somehow manages to crawl away from the snake's grasp and attempts to pick up his broken sword so he can keep fighting, but the snake gets back up first, and it is about to finish him off. Just before the snake bites off his head, it suddenly freezes in place right in front of him, almost as if time has stopped altogether. Ju-Hyun then hears a voice ring out in his head, and it is making fun of his desperate situation because no matter what he chooses to do here, he's going to end up dying. Ju-Hyun recognizes the voice as that of an artifact and begs it to help him get rid of the snake monster. But the voice tells him they won't do him any good because his legs have already been chewed off, and he's losing a lot of blood, so he's not going to survive much longer. And even if he did somehow manage to stop the bleeding, how exactly does he intend to get out of this tomb? Because he certainly won't be walking. It says it's a pity that someone with so much untapped potential would end up dying in a place like this. But Ju-Hyun says he didn't end up like this because he wanted to. And as he thinks back on his life, the only thing on his mind is how he wants to get back at Taejun Kwon for doing this to him. Seeing Ju-Hyun so full of rage and a thirst for vengeance even though he's at death's door amuses the artifact. So it decides it might be worth helping him after all and agrees to lend him its power, revealing its true form as a crow. It tells him to claim the throne of the true king if he thinks he is capable of such a feat, and after that, it flies straight into Ju-Hyun's body. The next thing Ju-Hyun knows, he's sitting in a police station, and one of the first things he notices is that his legs are back somehow, which is really confusing to him. But not as confusing as the fact that he isn't in the tomb anymore. He's still wondering what's going on when the police officer sitting in front of him tells him to sit down and hurry up and answer his questions because they want to clock out in time for the New Year's party. Hearing that, Ju-Hyun looks over at the calendar, and to his shock, it says the year is 2025. But that can't be right because, from what he remembers, 2025 was 15 years ago. He starts wondering if it's really possible that he was sent back in time, but just then, a woman gets in his face and starts yelling at him for wasting their time here. Ju-Hyun feels like he remembers her face from somewhere, and when he looks over and spots her son with a wide grin on his face, he finally remembers what this is about. The kid basically tried to rage bait him into a fight, and before Ju-Hyun could even do anything, the kid fell to the ground and pretended he was hit. And after that, the kid's mother dragged him to the police station for it. Ju-Hyun tries to recall how this situation was resolved last time, and he remembers how the mother basically demanded an outrageous settlement amount, and he was forced to get on his knees and beg for forgiveness, just so she would reduce the amount because, back then, he had absolutely no money. The mother is starting to get impatient since Ju-Hyun has been staring off into space for a while now, so she raises her hand and is about to slap him, but all of a sudden, Ju-Hyun's years of intense combat training kick in at the threat of bodily harm, and he proceeds to catch her arm before she hits him. This shocks everyone there, including him, since he didn't think his body would be able to move this fast at this point in time. But moving on from that, he yells at her and tells her to give it a rest already, because they all know her son is the one who started that fight, yet she's here demanding such outrageous compensation for that spoiled brat. The boy hears Ju-Hyun call him a spoiled brat and gets mad, so he lunges at him, but Ju-Hyun's skills kick in again, and before the boy can punch him, he proceeds to judo flip the kid onto the ground. Doing that definitively confirms to Ju-Hyun that he has retained all the combat skills he built up over the years, and if everything goes the same way it did last time, he should be able to finally turn things around for himself. However, a moment later, he snaps back to reality and realizes that he just flipped the kid in the middle of a police station, so he's definitely getting in trouble for this. A few minutes later, Ju-Hyun is locked in a jail cell while the mother screams about him hitting her son, and he could have argued self-defense to avoid getting locked up, but he honestly doesn't care since, in a few days, once the relics appear, the world is going to become a lawless wasteland anyway, so a criminal record won't mean much. Besides, compared to everything he went through in his previous life, spending a few hours in a jail cell is practically nothing. From what Ju-Hyun remembers, this year, violent earthquakes will begin happening all across the globe, and structures called tombs will emerge, and those tombs will contain artifacts that possess immense power, and as a result, people from all across the world ventured into the tombs in search of those relics. As luck would have it, Ju-Hyun was one of those people, and he managed to stumble across a relic in a tomb after tons of effort and hard work. and he thought it was going to be his ticket to a good life since excavating relics was very lucrative. But he should have known that it wouldn't be that easy because, not long after that, big corporations began to monopolize the dungeons, making it so that no one aside from them could gain access to relics, and then they'd sell those relics for millions at auction. At first, people tried to fight back against the corporations because it wasn't fair that they had excluded everyone else from the tombs, but with the military firepower they had at their disposal, no one was able to defy them. The governments weren't able to stop them either because relics had already become too valuable to ignore, and anyone with enough power wanted control over them. For most people, this was where their tomb raiding dreams ended, but Zhu Hian was an exception because, thanks to his exceptional tomb raiding skills, he was scouted by a man named Taejun Quan, the chairman of TKBM, a large dungeon monopolizer, and as a result, he was allowed to continue tomb raiding, but he was also forced to handle all of Taejun's dirty work, smuggling, stealing, and killing for relics, all just to line Taejun's pockets, and the only reason he put up with it was because he thought that was his only chance to have a better life. However, in the end, he was unfortunate enough to end up falling into a trap in the last tomb he raided. He doesn't want to let that happen again, so he needs to prepare himself to take full advantage of the tombs while he still can. However, that's a lot easier said than done because, while he may have his memories and combat skills from his past life, that alone won't be enough. He needs to get ready to start excavating as soon as possible, but he has no idea how to do that as he is now. Just then, Zhu Hian sees a set of glowing lights right in front of his face, and at first, he thinks he must be hallucinating, but then the light changes shape and calls him a thief who can barely hold a shovel. Zhu Hian realizes that this must be the work of a relic, and he assumes it must be that crow he met just before he died, so he gets up and yells at it to show itself and stop hiding. However, nothing appears after he says all that, and the only thing that changes is that his system panel now shows a progress bar, telling him that he is 1/4 of the way to unlocking a spy skill. The mission says he is now able to detect everything around him within a 1-meter radius. Zhu Hian still thinks that Crow is behind this status screen, and he tells it to stop treating his life like a game, but then the screen changes to tell him he needs to unlock all 4 basic skills that all Tomb Raiders need. Zhu Hian realizes he is the only one who can see the panel, and now that he really pays attention, he realizes that he really can see everything within a 1-meter radius crystal clear. Even the smallest details around him stand out in a way they never did before, making it obvious that this ability is already taking effect. He remembers that this was one of the abilities that he gained from the archaeologist relic he found in his last life, and although the relic is gone, it looks like the ability still remains, somehow. And since it says he is only 1/4 of the way through the mission, that must mean there are 3 other skills left for him to unlock. Just then, someone comes to get him from the cell, and it turns out to be Jianwu, a detective that Zhu Hian was friends with back then. Jianwu heard about what happened, and he was able to get Zhu Hian released by proving that the kid was a serial scam artist who baits people into fights all the time and demands a settlement afterward. Jianwu was one of the few people who actually looked out for Zhu Hian till the end, so Zhu Hian is really glad to see him again after his past life of hardship. As Jianwu and Zhu Hian are walking back from the station, Zhu Hian asks Jianwu if he has heard about anything strange happening lately. Jianwu has no idea what he's talking about and tells him he'd be better off asking a fortune teller about that sort of thing, and with that kind of answer, Zhu Hian can confirm that relic users really haven't appeared yet. After that, Zhu Hian says goodbye to Jianwu for the night, and he assumes that the tombs must have already started appearing like last time, but people simply haven't found out about them yet. And if that really is the case, then this is the perfect time for him to make his move. Every minute that passes is another chance for someone else to discover one of those tombs first, so he can't afford to waste any time. However, he still has one major problem: money. Most of the early relics are in Europe and America, so he needs to raise enough money for a plane ticket, and he's thinking about how to get the money for it. But all of a sudden, as he is turning into a back alley to get home, he runs into Park, one of the people who has been tormenting him at his part-time job. Back then, Zhu Hian desperately needed money, so he was forced to work at an art gallery owned by Park's sister, and he and his buddies made sure to make his life there a living nightmare any chance they got. Right now, they intend to beat Zhu Hian up for fun just because they can, but they have no idea that Zhu Hian isn't the same spineless weakling he was in his last life. One of them raises his hand to smack Zhu Hian in the face, but Zhu Hian beats him to the punch and smacks the guy so hard he falls to the ground. Park can't believe Zhu Hian would actually dare to fight back, so he runs at him, intending to teach him a lesson. However, Park gets the wind punched out of him, and then Zhu Hian knees him in the face for good measure. The others are starting to wonder how Zhu Hian became so good at fighting, but they assume there is no way he can beat all of them if they rush him at the same time. However, they were sorely mistaken because Joo-hyun proceeds to wipe the floor with them, all without so much as breaking a sweat. Park is so enraged that he pulls a knife on Joo-hyun, and the others try to calm him down since, yeah, they wanted to beat Joo-hyun up, but it's going to be bad if they really end up killing him. However, Park is too angry to care right now. Joo-hyun isn't so worried about Park pulling a knife on him since he is skilled enough to handle that, but what he is worried about is the fact that the knife he is holding is an artifact, and he has no idea how Park got his hands on it, especially since he has no idea that it's a relic. It's possible that a few relics slipped out into human society naturally, and that's something he's going to have to watch out for going forward. But right now, since it's just Park holding the knife, there's nothing for him to be worried about because stealing it from him is going to be a piece of cake. Park lunges at Joo-hyun and tries to slash him, but Joo-hyun masterfully dodges all his attacks and disarms him in less than 10 seconds, and now that he has the knife in his possession, he decides to show these goons what a relic can really do. As he activates the knife, it enhances his body, allowing him to see all the weak points of his opponents as well as boosting his speed and agility, and with that boost, he is able to rush forward and slash Park's goons multiple times without either of them getting the chance to react. Of course, he made sure to avoid hitting any vital organs since he didn't want to kill them, but the fact that Joo-hyun was actually willing to stab them scares the group so much that they are no longer willing to fight. However, Joo-hyun isn't about to let them get off that easily, so he outright robs them. A little while later, Park calls his sister to tell her about what happened, but she finds it hard to believe that Joo-hyun would be capable of beating 3 people up all on his own and robbing them afterwards. Park starts telling her about all the weird stuff Joo-hyun did, including how he started moving way faster after stealing the knife for some reason, but she isn't really interested in the details and just asks Park how much Joo-hyun managed to steal from him. Park tells her that Joo-hyun stole all the money in his account, along with the knife and Buddha statue he had on him, and his sister doesn't really care about all that other stuff, but she freaks out when she hears that Joo-hyun took the Buddha statue because that thing was really important, and she yells at Park to go find a way to get it back. The following morning, Joo-hyun heads over to a pawn shop to sell the Buddha statue, but to his disappointment, he finds out that it's basically a piece of cheap junk, so it isn't worth much. He is starting to wonder why Park was carrying around something as useless as this, but just then, his system panel opens up and activates his spy skill, allowing him to analyze the statue and discover that there is something hidden inside. Joo-hyun starts fiddling around with the statue some more, and after a bit of probing, a secret compartment is revealed, from which a small pouch of the Walter White special drops to the ground. Joo-hyun can immediately tell what this is, and he figures out that this must mean the entire art gallery Park's sister owns must be a drug fencing operation, so he decides to give Jeonwoo a call. A little while later, Park's sister is in her office making a phone call to her boss to try and explain how she lost one of the drug samples, but all of a sudden, the police barge in with Park in handcuffs, and they are here to arrest her because they've already concluded that this is a drug operation. She attempts to bluff her way out of the situation by claiming the police have no evidence to link any drugs back to her, and she's banking on the fact that all her warehouses are locked with secure passwords, so there's no way the police would have been able to get in there to find the drugs. However, unfortunately for her, she failed to account for the fact that since Joo-hyun worked for her for a long time, he knows all the warehouse passcodes, so he was able to unlock them. And the police found a bunch of drugs hidden inside the art she had in storage, which is more than enough for them to put her behind bars for a long time. As a result of his help in bringing down the drug ring, Joo-hyun is given a reward of 10 million yen, and he is pretty happy about this. Since it covers the startup capital, he's going to need to begin his excavation endeavors, and he plans to begin working on it tomorrow. But as he is walking home, he is shocked to find out that his apartment is completely gone because a giant structure has emerged right on top of it. Joo-hyun isn't so worried about his stuff, but rather the fact that a tomb has already appeared in this country, and he wasn't expecting it to happen so soon. Meanwhile, down at the base of the tomb, a woman named Linda Walker from America has just arrived on the scene, and she is telling HQ that they got lucky with this one since it looks like the government of this country has yet to realize just how valuable tombs are, so it should be easy for them to claim the treasure for themselves. However, as she says this, she notices a man named Rui nearby, and the two seem to know each other because, just like Linda, Rui is part of the very few who know about tombs, and he doesn't plan on letting a chance like this slip through his fingers. Having people who know about tombs around makes Joo-hyun's plan several times harder than it already was, but he hears Linda mention that her group is bringing in explosives to try and bust their way in, and based on that, Ju Hyun can tell that people still haven't figured out how to deal with tombs properly yet, and Ju Hyun plans to take advantage of that to clear the tomb before they get a chance to spot him. Ju Hyun finds a section of tomb glyphs that he predicts will lead to the entrance, so he starts following them. Tomb glyphs are basically the language of the relics, and relics love to write about themselves a lot, so if you pay attention to what the glyphs say, you should be able to figure out exactly how to clear any tomb. Ju Hyun eventually finds the section that is meant to be the front entrance, so he takes out his knife and slashes the pillar to open up the tomb, and as he does so, the ground begins to shake and a blinding light erupts from the ground. Rui and Linda both see this happen, and they are both absolutely stunned since neither of them has ever seen something like this happen with a tomb before, but they aren't about to miss their opportunity to claim the artifact, so they both jump in without hesitation before the gate closes. Meanwhile, inside, Ju Hyun has already made his way into the main area of the tomb, and from the glyphs, he was able to figure out that this one is based on the story of the boy who dropped his axe in the river and was offered a gold and silver one instead, so he has a good idea of how he's meant to pass the trial. He begins by throwing his knife into the water, and as he does so, a giant snake emerges, asking who has lost yet another treasure in his lake. Ju Hyun calls its attention, and once the snake spots him, it begins the trial and opens its mouth to reveal two knives, asking Ju Hyun which of these is his. Ju Hyun knows that the trap of this test is that if he accepts either the gold or silver one knowing it isn't his, the snake is going to eat him, so he admits that neither of the blades are his, and the snake commends him for his honesty before pulling out Ju Hyun's real knife. According to the original legend, after he confirms that this really is his knife, the snake is supposed to reward him by granting him both the silver and gold weapons, but Ju Hyun doesn't want to do it that way, so instead of confirming that the knife is his, he grabs it and slashes the snake's mouth. The snake cries out in pain and demands to know what Ju Hyun thinks he's doing when he was just about to pass the trial, but Ju Hyun says he doesn't trust anything the relics say. After all, even if he did play along and pass the snake's trial the right way, he's pretty sure any reward the snake provides would have turned him into a deranged killer. The snake can't believe Ju Hyun actually knows about his secret curse, but Ju Hyun recalls that in his past life, the snake's relic was obtained by that American woman, and she ended up turning into a serial killer because of it, so he's not about to let that happen to him as well. Ju Hyun then proceeds to leap into the air and stab the snake right in the skull and orders it to just admit defeat and end this quickly. The snake refuses to give up and let Ju Hyun claim him, so Ju Hyun digs the knife in even deeper and tells it that it doesn't have a choice here. The snake begins thrashing around in pain and trying to shake Ju Hyun off, but Ju Hyun absolutely refuses to let go. There are two ways that a Tomb Raider can gain a relic, and that is either by having a high affinity and having the relic agree to join him, or by using dominance and basically beating the relic down until they are forced to obey your commands. Most raiders try to gain as much affinity as possible since it's the easiest way to get a relic on their side without a fight, but having learned about the true nature of relics in his past life, Ju Hyun has no intention of trying to get along with the relics at all. The snake keeps trying its hardest to get away from Ju Hyun, but it's no use, and before long, the snake loses the strength to fight back and is forced to submit to Ju Hyun, transforming into the gold and silver axe relic. Having successfully excavated this tomb, Ju Hyun now has 3 of his 4 Tomb Raider skills unlocked, so he only needs one more now, but he's not sure how to go about it, so he's about to start looking for information. But just then he gets a notification that he has just received the title of Abuser of Relics, and as a result, his dominance has gone up, but his affinity has also been reduced. Ju Hyun doesn't mind his affinity being reduced, but he hates the fact that he's being called an abuser, so he yells at the system for making him sound bad. Just then, Ju Hyun hears footsteps approaching, and he doesn't want to get spotted in here, so he immediately hides as Linda and Rui enter the boss room. Rui is excited and walks up to the lake before dropping a relic in the water so he can begin the trial. Linda asks what he's doing, so Rui explains that the prophet in his group told him that all he'd need to do is toss a relic in the lake to get things started, but nothing is happening right now. Linda is surprised to learn that Rui's group really has a prophecy relic, but just then, the entire cave begins to shake, and it looks like it's about to collapse. So Linda and Rui make a run for it, so they can escape before they get buried alive. Back in town, Park's goons are all in the office, panicking because they don't know what to do now that Park and his sister have been arrested. There's no way they can run the business by themselves, and they don't know how to make money any other way, so they start cursing Ju Hyun out for causing all this. However, just then, Kureha receives a call from Ju Hyun, and they all panic because they are scared of Ju Hyun after the beating he gave them last time. But they still answer anyway because they are also scared of what he might do to them if they don't answer his calls. but Ju-hyun immediately yells at them for taking so long to answer and threatens to beat them up over it. He tells them he has a little errand he wants them to run for him over at Midas, but when Korea hears the word Midas, he freaks out because he recalls that Midas is the world's largest auction house, located in Las Vegas, and if Ju-hyun can get in there, then he should be able to find out what Taejun is up to right now. He asks them to go to this month's auction and look out for a man going by the alias Jack Kamen since he knows that was Taejun's alias, but Korea asks how they are supposed to get to such a high-class event, and Ju-hyun tells him he's going to have to figure it out on his own. Of course, Ju-hyun will pay them well for the job, so the expenses won't be an issue, and he's not really giving them a choice here since it's either they do as he says, or he beats them to death because he hasn't forgotten all the times they bullied him with Park. The next morning, Ju-hyun buys all the gear he's going to need for his next tomb raid, but as he is leaving the store, he ends up bumping into Rui. He is surprised to see him out here, but if Rui is around, then that must mean another tomb is about to appear, because Ju-hyun recalls that around this time, Rui's group had a prophecy artifact that could inform them of things like these in advance. He also notices that Rui himself seems to have an artifact, and he's not sure what it does, but he's going to steal it regardless. To create a distraction, Ju-hyun sprays his drink all over Rui, and while pretending to help him clean himself up, he pickpockets the artifact. And before Rui even had a chance to realize that something was wrong, the ground begins to shake as the tomb manifests, so Ju-hyun runs off, leaving Rui confused. But a moment later, he gets a call from HQ telling him that a new prophecy just came in, so they wanted to let him know that he needs to be careful because the same person who beat him to the previous tomb is nearby again. And as he hears that, Rui realizes that the person in question must have been Ju-hyun. As the tomb manifests, dozens of swords begin to appear out of nowhere, and in no time, Ju-hyun and a bunch of random people find themselves trapped in the heart of the tomb. Ju-hyun can immediately feel a malicious aura surrounding him, so he can tell that the relic this tomb belongs to must be particularly nasty. Considering all the broken weapons around him, he deduces that this tomb must have something to do with the legend of Muramasa. The Muramasa family was a family of swordsmiths in ancient Japan, and their swords were renowned for their exceptional sharpness. But while this brought fame to the family at first, it also led to their ruin because they were slain by the very swords they created. By all indications, the relic he's looking for should be the sword that was used to cut the family down, but finding it isn't going to be easy when this place is filled with countless duplicates. And on top of that, the system suddenly pops up with a prompt, warning him that the energy within this tomb is corrosive and has already begun damaging his skin. So if Ju-hyun stays here for too long, he will suffer even worse injuries. At first, he doesn't think this is going to be that much of a problem, since all he needs to do is find the relic as quickly as possible and get out of here. But that turns out to be a lot harder than he thought it would be since this place is absolutely massive. He thought he'd have the edge when it comes to finding relics since the Golden Axe has an ability that allows it to resonate with other artifacts, but at this rate, he will never get close enough to actually pinpoint its location. He wishes he had just waited and followed that guy so he could lead him to the relic. But just then, Ju-hyun hears the screams of a bunch of people nearby. He rushes over to see what's going on, and that's when he finds a group of civilians trapped in a pit, with one of them having been possessed by a cursed sword. She will likely keep attacking people until they are all dead if he doesn't do something soon, but those people didn't end up down there by themselves, so Ju-hyun assumes Rui must have sacrificed them to make progress in the tomb. To confirm his theory, he yells down into the hole and asks the people if a shady-looking guy pushed them down there, and one of the men down there tells him that's exactly what happened. And then after he pushed them down, that bridge appeared out of nowhere. For now, Ju-hyun decides to help rescue the people so they can show him which way Rui went, and to do that, he decides to test out the rope artifact he swiped from Rui earlier. And as an added bonus, the act of pickpocketing Rui earlier earned Ju-hyun a dexterity skill, which was the final skill needed for his Tomb Raider starter pack. So the system congratulates him on meeting the conditions and informs Ju-hyun that a reward will be waiting for him once he leaves the ruins. He can't wait to see what he gets when he's done here, but first, he needs to deal with this mess, so he slides down into the pit, and as the girl turns to attack him, Ju-hyun fights her off with his knife. He could win this fight easily, but he doesn't really want to hurt her since he knows she is just a victim of this tomb's curse. So instead of cutting her down, Ju-hyun uses the rope to tie her up, and once she is completely restrained, she finally snaps out of the curse. Now that she has been taken care of, Ju-hyun turns to the other people and asks if any of them happened to see which direction Rui went, and one man happened to see him head down that path and go into a cave, and Ju-hyun believes Rui must be heading right towards the location of the relic. Just then, the girl Juhyun tied up calls out to him and asks if he can let her go now because this rope is really weird, and since she's back to normal now, Juhyun doesn't see a reason to keep her restrained, so he tells the rope to let her go, and it slowly returns to his wrist, albeit reluctantly. Juhyun then turns to the people and tells them that he's going to help them get out of here, but first he needs their help finding Rui, and that way, they'll be able to pay him back for what he did for them. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the tomb, Rui is currently on his way to find the Muramasa sword, and he says he's glad he got rid of all those witnesses while he had the chance because now all he needs to do is get the sword, and then he will be able to get out of here and find Juhyun so he can take him out for daring to trick him. However, despite all of his maniacal laughter, even after searching for a while, he still hasn't managed to find the real Muramasa because there are tons of duplicate broken swords lying around here, and he has no idea what the real one is supposed to look like. He has spent so much time searching here that Juhyun and the other people have managed to catch up to him. And the second the people spot Rui, they all gather around and start jumping him. Rui begs them to stop, but the crowd is too frenzied to care. And as they continue to beat him up, he starts wondering how this could be happening since none of these people should have been able to escape that pit. But then he sees Juhyun looking at him with a massive smile on his face, and he finally understands that he was the one behind all this. Since Juhyun knows the relic has to be around here, he activates his axe and uses it to scan the area so he can find Muramasa, and it doesn't take long for him to locate it. But when he picks it up, he suddenly hears the voice of the axe congratulating him for finding it and telling him that in order to claim its power, Juhyun will need to wet the blade with the blood of 10 humans. Juhyun laughs and asks if that's the test here, and Muramasa confirms this, saying the blood of humans is the only thing that can satisfy it. It then tells Juhyun to hurry up and kill those humans over there. But Juhyun outright refuses and begins using domination to force Muramasa into submission. Muramasa tries to fight back, but Juhyun is way too strong, and before long, Muramasa is forced to reabsorb all its copies and restore itself under Juhyun's command. Juhyun then helps the people escape the pit just as he had promised, but as they are climbing out, he notices one familiar figure trying to sneak out with them. So he grabs Rui and tells him he isn't going anywhere. Rui realizes that he's completely at Juhyun's mercy here, so he starts trying to convince him to let him go and offers to put in a good word for him with his government so Juhyun will be compensated well. He even offers to get Juhyun the prophecy relic, and Juhyun asks how he intends to do that when the relic can only be used by its owner. But Rui says there's a company that can handle that for him. Hearing him mention a company that's supporting Tomb Raiders, Juhyun presses Rui for more information, and when he finds out that the company in question is TKBM, the company owned by Taejin, he has heard all he needs to hear and kicks Rui right in the gut, making him cough up a mouthful of blood. He then takes the rope and leaves Rui in the hole to meet his doom before ordering Muramasa to seal off the tomb, burying Rui in a pile of rubble while everyone else manages to make it out alive. The official story the news is running with is that the whole thing was caused by a regular earthquake, but many of the survivors report seeing countless swords appearing on the walls, as well as a Japanese man who claimed to be part of the JSDF who tried to kill them. The Japanese Prime Minister is beside himself with rage because with the disaster caused by Rui's failure, the truth about the tombs is about to be exposed. And even worse than that, with what Rui did to those civilians, Japan's reputation is absolutely terrible now. He demands an explanation from the Defense Force captain, and the captain says there was unexpected interference from the man the prophecy had mentioned. But the Prime Minister doesn't care about that because it was their job to get rid of that guy in the first place. The defense captain accepts that he failed his objective, but he says they can still take Juhyun out since, with the Book of Prophecy, they can track his movements and target him directly. Meanwhile, over in a motel bathroom, Juhyun is taking a break to assess the extent of his injuries, and it's pretty bad. The relic poison has already spread all across his arm, and the fact that he used domination on Muramasa made it even worse. Dominance is a double-edged sword, because although it allows him to ignore the relic's trials and force relics to submit to him, it has a downside because the stronger the relic is, the more it can resist and fight back. And if Juhyun continues doing things this way, he realizes his body won't last much longer. Just then, the system pops up again and tells Juhyun that his reward is finally ready, and it gives him the choice of either an affinity path reward or a dominance path reward. Juhyun obviously selects the dominance path reward since even if it damages him, dominating relics is still a whole lot better than being manipulated by them, and the system proceeds to issue his reward, which turns out to be a pill. The system informs him that it is a high-grade consumable relic, and Juhyun is a little skeptical of the pill at first, but he just goes, "If I die, then I die," and swallows it anyway. All of a sudden, he feels the pill take effect in his body, and the relic poison in his arm slowly begins fading away. The system then informs him that he has acquired a tolerance skill, which makes him more resistant to relic poison than normal. And Ju-Hyun is astonished because resistance to relic poison is one of the best things he could have received. He can't help but wonder why the crow system is willing to help him so much, since making things easier for him wouldn't help the crow in any way, but he decides to just accept things as they are for now. Just then, the system informs Ju-Hyun that an S-grade relic has just locked onto him and is currently reading his future, and as Ju-Hyun learns of this, he immediately realizes that it must be the Book of Prophecy. It doesn't create a tomb like other relics and instead chooses its owner and appears before them inconspicuously. The person the book chose at this point in time was a girl named Yuka Sasaki, and after the Japanese government found out about her power, they offered her a ton of support in exchange for using the prophecy power to help them with excavations. At first, it seemed like a happy ending, but Yuka was never great at studying, so it was really hard for her to decipher the book's ancient language when reading the prophecies, and when another prophet appeared, Yuka was killed and discarded because she had become useless. Since the Book of Prophecy is keeping track of him now, Ju-Hyun decides to head over to Japan to confront it directly, and the next morning, when it's time for Sasaki to do her daily prophecy reading, she is horrified to find the pages full of messages telling her she's going to die. Ju-Hyun intentionally spent all night writing down threats to Sasaki's life because he knew the book wouldn't ignore something like that, and consequently, finding out that he is in Japan, the defense force would waste no time coming after him as well. However, he's a little surprised that they are waiting so long to make their move since he thought they would have attacked by now. It turns out that they were waiting for Sasaki since they want to send her in as a waitress to serve Ju-Hyun. Sasaki doesn't understand why she has to be the one to do this when Ju-Hyun is after her life, but they explain that Ju-Hyun probably doesn't know what she looks like, so he won't attack right away, and if she can get a good look at his face, her prophecy relic should be able to lock onto him completely, giving her a better understanding of what he's planning. It's a risky plan, but Sasaki has no choice but to go along with it, so she walks in pretending to be a waitress. However, the second she sees Ju-Hyun's face, she falls in love at first sight because he looks so handsome. Ju-Hyun can immediately tell that Sasaki is the prophecy user thanks to the special aura surrounding her, and he's surprised that the defense force would try something as bold as sending his target to sit so close to him. But it doesn't change much, and he begins reaching for his weapon. The defense force is about to rush in to rescue Sasaki, but all of a sudden, Sasaki slams the door shut and tells Ju-Hyun she's in love with him. Ju-Hyun really wasn't expecting Sasaki to start flirting out of nowhere, especially not when he was just about to kill her. But this works out perfectly for him since if Sasaki is on his side, then he has nothing to fear from the Book of Prophecy. He then blows his way out of the room and ties up the guards stationed outside before walking off with Sasaki. Sasaki had initially assumed that Ju-Hyun didn't know she was the prophecy user since she never revealed herself, and since he seems so nice, she was sure there's no way someone like this would want to kill her. And besides, since she has already looked him in the eyes, she'll be able to lock onto his future directly from now on, so there's no way Ju-Hyun will be able to kill her. But she can't do anything right now since she forgot the book back at home. Sasaki truly believed she was just going to enjoy a nice date with Ju-Hyun. But the second they turned down an alley, Ju-Hyun took out his sword and held it up to Sasaki's neck to threaten her. Sasaki can't believe this is happening, but Ju-Hyun tells her he already knows she's the prophecy user, and if she doesn't want to get hurt, then it will be in her best interest to just do as he says. Sasaki doesn't have much of a choice in this situation, so she agrees to listen to Ju-Hyun, and the first thing he tells her to do is hand over her cell phone. Sasaki gives it to him without a fight, and Ju-Hyun immediately smashes it on the ground so Sasaki's handlers won't be able to track her down for a while, and after that, he takes her to a restaurant so they can carry on with their date. Ju-Hyun sits Sasaki down in a private booth and pulls out a notebook before explaining that he wants her to write down every single one of the current prophecies written in the future guide, word for word. Sasaki tries telling him she can't do that since she left the future guide at home, but Ju-Hyun tells her all she needs to do to summon it is tap the tattoo on her arm and call out the relic's name. Sasaki had no idea that something like that was actually possible, but when she tries it, it does indeed summon the relic like Ju-Hyun said it would. And now that she has the future guide, Ju-Hyun tells her to start writing as much as possible. Sasaki is forced to write for hours non-stop, and her arms are starting to get tired, so she asks Ju-Hyun if she can take a break since her arm hurts, or better yet, she offers to just let him take the future guide altogether, but as tempting as that sounds, Ju-Hyun can't do that. The future guide is an S-grade relic, and while it is technically possible for him to claim it by using dominance like he did with the sword, doing so would cause him to suffer severe consequences. Ju-Hyun tells Sasaki to just hurry up, but just then, he hears the sound of some soldiers approaching, so he figures the military must have finally tracked him down, so there's only one thing left to do now. He plans to make sure no one can use the future guide to keep tabs on him anymore. Sasaki is terrified as Ju-hyun pulls out his sword and begs him to spare her, saying she'd be much more useful to him alive. But Ju-hyun assures her that she's not his target, and immediately after, he plunges his sword right into the future guide. The book screams out in pain as it realizes it is being attacked, but it's already too late because, a moment later, it is completely destroyed, and as a result, Sasaki passes out. Ju-hyun did this partially as a favor to Sasaki, since now that the future guide is gone, the government here won't have any reason to keep her under surveillance or dispose of her, so she might be able to live a relatively normal life. The soldiers who were here to stop Ju-hyun then burst in, and the commander is horrified when he sees the future guide in tatters on the table. He yells at Ju-hyun and tells him he's going to be executed for this, but Ju-hyun isn't worried at all and simply pulls out the mochi relic he swiped earlier before tossing it over to the soldiers. The effects of the mochi produce a highly addictive smell that causes anyone affected to desire the mochi more than anything else in the world, and in the case of the soldiers, it is more than enough to cause them to start mindlessly fighting over it. So Ju-hyun just casually walks out while they are busy with that. He then heads back home after that, and on the plane ride, he takes some time to read the prophecies that Sasaki wrote down, and among them, there's one that stands out because it mentions the Great Tomification. He recalls the event from his past life, and it pretty much caused the entire world to be swallowed up by a giant tomb, and it caused far more relics to begin circulating. According to the prophecy, in January, the time will be ripe for the Garden of Greed, which Ju-hyun assumes must be referring to the Midas auction in Las Vegas. Ju-hyun later meets up with Seung-woo and the others to ask about the investigation he asked them to do, and they manage to successfully narrow down all the possible attendees with the initials JK. Ju-hyun looks over the document and he finds a guy whom he is convinced is absolutely Taejun. And if Taejun is here, then there must be a pretty legendary relic going on sale at the auction. Ju-hyun flips through the auction house catalog, but he's a bit confused since none of the items here seem like they are god grade. That said, there are still a few things here that are worth bidding for, so Ju-hyun decides he might go for some of them. Seung-woo thinks Ju-hyun must be joking because most of the items in that auction start at $1 billion, and they don't think Ju-hyun has that much money. However, while they are right about Ju-hyun being short on cash right now, he doesn't think it's going to be much of a problem since, after all, they are in Vegas, so making a little money should be no problem. The first place Ju-hyun heads to is the slot machines at the casino, and after playing for a while, he has managed to rack up more than 4 jackpots in a row. The others have no idea how Ju-hyun is managing to win so much, and it draws so much attention that even the casino security gets called because they are sure Ju-hyun must be cheating somehow. That said, the casino can't just kick him out since they have no evidence, so the security guard asks Ju-hyun to submit to a pat-down, and Ju-hyun has nothing to hide, so he agrees, and sure enough, the security guard finds nothing on him. The guard's attention then shifts to the golden trinket in Ju-hyun's hand and asks what it is, so he says it's just something he picked up over in the gift shop because he liked the color. The guard sees nothing wrong with it, and since he couldn't find anything on Ju-hyun, he reluctantly lets him get back to playing. But in reality, the pocket knife is actually the golden axe, which Ju-hyun had temporarily transformed to make it easier to carry around. The golden axe's ability allows it to attract wealth to its user, meaning as long as Ju-hyun is holding it, he can't lose. He could keep winning on the slot machines if he wanted, but he thinks he has already drawn too much attention here. So he decides to leave for now and asks the others to pack up all the winnings so they can head out. Just then, an arrogant man walks into the casino, and Ju-hyun recognizes him immediately because this is Ito Takuya, one of Taejun's top lackeys. And the man who goes in after him is none other than Taejun himself. Taejun currently has no idea who Ju-hyun is since they've never met in this timeline, but Ju-hyun is going to make sure Taejun suffers for everything he put him through in the future. Just then, the silver axe begins acting up, and while the golden axe's ability draws wealth towards Ju-hyun, the silver axe's ability warns him when something is going to take his wealth away, so Ju-hyun can tell that something bad is about to happen. Ju-hyun then notices a bunch of people around him falling into despair as they inexplicably start losing money out of nowhere, and a moment later, he spots the person behind it all. It's a beautiful woman named Irene Halton, and while she may look perfectly normal, she is actually the owner of a god-grade relic. Back in the previous timeline, Ju-hyun recalls that the owners of the god-grade relics were known as the Kings of Fate, Conquest, and Abundance, and last but not least, Irene was known as the Queen of Bankruptcy. Everywhere she went, the people around her would fall victim to a series of unexplained misfortunes, so Ju-hyun wants to stay as far away from her as possible so he doesn't get affected by her misfortune as well. But as soon as Irene spots him, she begins chasing after Juhyun because he's the person she was looking for. Juhyun tries to make it out the door before she reaches him, but for some reason, there's an ominous presence preventing him from leaving, and a moment later, Irene catches up to Juhyun and grabs his arm out of excitement. As she does this, Juhyun receives a notification telling him that his luck is being overshadowed by great misfortune, and his relics are beginning to take damage. So Juhyun pulls away and tells Irene to get her hands off him. Irene apologizes for touching Juhyun without permission, and she explains that she was hoping he would tell her his secret to being so lucky, since she heard he won a ton of games a minute ago. Juhyun tries to feign ignorance and tells Irene he has no idea what she's talking about, but Sungwoo and the others can't understand why Juhyun would want to reject such a pretty girl, so they try to invite Irene out to lunch. But all of a sudden, they are all hit with terrible stomach aches and fall to the ground. Irene begins apologizing to them because she didn't intend for this to happen. Juhyun makes a break for the door since he doesn't want to end up like those three, but because of the bad luck, he slams headfirst into it instead. Irene asks him if he's okay, but Juhyun tells her all this is her fault to begin with, and Irene is aware of that, which is why she wanted to talk to Juhyun in the first place. She explains that she recently noticed that wherever she goes, misfortune befalls the people around her, so she wanted to ask Juhyun for help turning her luck around so she can bring people good luck instead. Juhyun is surprised to hear Irene say that since she doesn't seem anything like the Irene he knew in his past life. Just then, the status screen pops up again and informs Juhyun that his tolerance skill has activated, and it is currently mitigating the effects of Irene's misfortune, and since he is no longer affected, it gives Juhyun a great idea. Simply being around Irene can help strengthen his tolerance skill, and on top of that, if he takes her into the auction hall with him, she will cause misfortune to the other bidders and reduce Juhyun's competition. Irene asks him if he's willing to help her, and Juhyun says he can assist her, but right now he has an important appointment, so he asks if she'd like to join him. And Irene is more than happy to come along. Just as Juhyun hoped, thanks to Irene's bad luck, most of the participants in the auction were forced to leave due to various emergencies. Even Taejun wasn't spared because one of his factories apparently burned down, yet he didn't leave, so Juhyun takes that as a sign that there must be something really worth buying here. While he waits to see what comes up, he thinks about everything he has learned about Irene so far, and he still can't wrap his head around the fact that she's so nice now, but in the future, she had an absolutely twisted personality. She also doesn't seem to know anything about relics, so he wonders how she got her hands on a god-tier relic in the first place, but then again, it's possible that the relic might have latched onto her without her knowledge, and being forced to live with misfortune for so long is probably what ruined her life and turned her into a lunatic. Especially since, with the way the relic works, the happier Irene gets, the worse the effects of her misfortune become. The auction continues just as Juhyun expected it to, and just as it's about to come to an end, the host announces that they have a special item for sale that was left off their catalog, and when Juhyun sees it, his eyes light up because he can tell that it is a relic known as the Tree of Life. Juhyun immediately bids on it, but so does Taejun, and Juhyun can't let Taejun get his hands on this relic because it is very special. In the ancient Dahlia Empire, there was a monarch who desired immortality, so he spent countless years and resources searching for something known as the Tree of Life. Before Juhyun was sent back to the past, his body had been severely damaged by relic poison, and the only thing keeping him alive at that point was the fruit from the Tree of Life. However, the person who supplied him the fruit was Taejun, which is why Juhyun was forced to do all of his dirty work in exchange for the fruits that would keep him alive. Juhyun had no idea that this was where Taejun got the Tree of Life from, but he knows that if he lets the tree fall into Taejun's hands again, then he is going to inevitably face the same cruel fate as in his past life. The announcer is a little surprised by how enthusiastic Juhyun and Taejun are in the bidding because, from what he knows, the only effect the tree has is as an aphrodisiac, and Irene is just as shocked to see Juhyun so enthusiastic about something like that. However, Juhyun doesn't care about how he looks right now because all that matters is that he gets his hands on the tree. Due to Juhyun and Taejun's enthusiasm, the other bidders figure the tree must be really valuable, so they start bidding as well, and the value quickly climbs all the way up to the tens of millions. Juhyun really wasn't expecting things to play out like this, and he doesn't have enough money to continue bidding, but he does have a secret weapon at his disposal, so he turns to Irene and asks her for a small favor. A moment later, just as the tree was about to be sold to Taejun, Irene suddenly bids 100 million, and this completely blindsides Taejun, since he didn't think anyone aside from him would be willing to spend that much money on the tree. He tries upping his bid to 150 million, but Irene immediately outbids him with 200 million, and when he goes to 220 million, she goes all the way up to 300 million. Taejin desperately wants to keep trying to outbid Irene, but his subordinate tells him it's no use since Irene is the eldest daughter of the Holton family, and the Holton family has way more money at their disposal than Taejin does. Irene ends up winning the Tree of Life at the auction, and after the auction is over, she and Joo-hyun head to the front desk to check out. Joo-hyun thanks Irene for helping him get the tree, and Irene tells him it's not a problem since, if this means Joo-hyun is going to help her with her luck problem, then it was well worth it. She then asks Joo-hyun how he intends to improve her luck, and she assumes he's going to give her a talisman or a charm of some kind. On the contrary, Joo-hyun tells her she's the one who has to give him something. He explains that if she gives him the strange item that she recently acquired, then all her bad luck will vanish. But Irene looks at him with confusion because she doesn't recall picking up any strange items. Joo-hyun is surprised to hear this since he is certain that Irene has the relic and there's no reason for her to lie to him, so he believes she may genuinely be unaware of it. He then asks her if she has noticed any new tattoos appearing on her body recently, since being bonded with a relic always results in a tattoo as a symbol of the bond, whether you're aware of it or not. As he says this, Irene looks a little uncomfortable because she did recently have a tattoo show up on her body out of nowhere, but she can't show it to him in public, so she gives him a picture instead. Sure enough, there really are tattoos on her body, but Joo-hyun recognizes them as the mark of a parasitic relic. Parasitic relics are notoriously hard to get rid of, so it's not going to be easy to remove it from her. He apologizes to Irene and informs her that this is going to take a little more effort than he originally thought, but he assures her that he isn't going to ditch her, and he gives her his contact info so they can stay in touch. In the meantime, the front desk worker returns with the items Joo-hyun and Irene won in the auction, and he tells them that the Tree of Life has already been paid for, but the bill for the other items Joo-hyun bid on will still need to be settled. Joo-hyun tells him that won't be a problem since the money he earned at the casino earlier should be more than enough to cover it, but when he calls the guys to have them bring the money over, there's no answer on their end, so Joo-hyun realizes they must be trying to pull a fast one on him. Meanwhile, Seung and the others are currently running as fast as they can, trying to get as far away from Joo-hyun as possible so they can keep the money for themselves, but unfortunately for them, the Silver Axe's power leads Joo-hyun right to the losers who are trying to rob him, and he doesn't intend to let them get away with this. The guys are all terrified because they think Joo-hyun might kill them with his axe, but he actually has something else in mind. He pulls out one of the relics he bought from the auction and activates it, revealing that it's the Ancient Law Code relic. It has the effect of reflecting any attack against the user back at the attacker. It also works on acts such as betrayal and theft, and it is able to influence a target's future actions. So, after Joo-hyun binds all three of them with the law code, nothing will happen to them for now, but if they ever attempt to betray him again, they will be ripped apart on the spot. The others are relieved that Joo-hyun isn't going to kill them, but they also realize that he probably isn't bluffing about them getting ripped apart, so they agree to just do as he says from now on. Joo-hyun takes them back to his hotel room and asks them to start by picking the fruit from the Tree of Life and putting it back in its pot afterward. The Tree of Life is extremely fussy and refused to let Joo-hyun touch it when he tried earlier, but it turns out that Seung has a high affinity with relics, so the Tree of Life is fine with him touching it. While the guys are busy looking after the tree, Joo-hyun suddenly receives a call from an unknown number. He recognizes it as Taejin's, and the fact that Taejin is calling him now means he must have started looking into Joo-hyun after he beat him in the auction for the Tree of Life. He answers the call, and Taejin immediately invites Joo-hyun to dinner because he'd like to negotiate with him for the tree, but Joo-hyun says there's nothing to negotiate because he's not handing the tree over, and then he abruptly ends the call. Taejin is frustrated because he can't believe Joo-hyun would dare to hang up on him, but then his lackey asks Taejin to let him handle it, since he is sure he will be able to retrieve the tree from Joo-hyun. After all, he assumes Joo-hyun must be a regular civilian, so if Taejin is willing to grant him access to a few of the company's relics, then he's sure he can complete the mission with ease. A few days later, Joo-hyun is sitting in a bar by himself, and the Silver Axe already warned him that someone was coming after him, but he's surprised it's taking them this long to make their move. Just then, someone walks up behind Joo-hyun, and it turns out to be Ito, who's here on orders from Taejin to get the tree. He tries to get Joo-hyun's attention, but Joo-hyun keeps intentionally ignoring him, trying to get a reaction out of him, and it doesn't take long for Ito to flare up because of the disrespect. He then proceeds to yell at Joo-hyun, but Joo-hyun continues to ignore him and elbows Ito in the stomach, pretending he didn't see him there. Joo-hyun knows that Ito may keep up the image of a refined and skilled man, but deep down, he's just an insecure loser, and after playing on those insecurities by calling him Taejin's lapdog, Ito flares up and loses his composure. As a result, Ju-hyun gets a notification telling him that Ito's dominance has temporarily been reduced, and since dominance is necessary to use high-grade relics, that means the relic he brought is practically useless now. In a fit of rage, Ito takes out a bottle of sand and attempts to use it on Ju-hyun. But to his utter shock, it doesn't work when he tries it. He doesn't understand what's going on, but then Ju-hyun knocks him to the ground and explains that he can't use the relic because his dominance is too low. Ito is shocked to learn that Ju-hyun knows about relics too, and he tells him he's going to pay for this. But Ju-hyun doesn't pay his threats much mind because he's more focused on claiming the sand bottle for himself. The relic is impressed by how high Ju-hyun's dominance is, so it tells him he's free to use it as much as he wants. And now that the relic has officially acknowledged Ju-hyun as its master, Ju-hyun proceeds to use it on Ito, turning him into a mindless zombie and leaving him there writhing in pain. Ju-hyun is sure Taejin is still going to keep coming after him after this, but a display like this should at least slow him down a little. A few days later, Taejin gets called to the police station to pick up Ito because he got himself arrested after acting like a zombie at the bar for hours on end. Taejin can't believe Ito actually failed to retrieve the tree from Ju-hyun, but first things first, he asks his other subordinates to go retrieve the sand glass from Ito because he can't afford to lose such a valuable relic. However, his men tell him that when Ito was arrested, the sand glass wasn't among his possessions, so they believe Ju-hyun stole it. As Taejin realizes this, his blood begins boiling with rage, and he tells his men to go contact a man named Nogami because they need to change strategies if they want to deal with Ju-hyun. Meanwhile, on Ju-hyun's end, he has just landed back home, and he is thrilled by how well this trip went for him because he managed to get his hands on a ton of useful relics. But just as he's about to head home, he is suddenly met by Taejin's legal representative, Masako. Ju-hyun figured she would make an appearance sooner or later, and she says she has something she'd like to discuss with Ju-hyun, so he agrees to hear her out for now. They sit down together at a cafe in the airport, and Masako presents Ju-hyun with a contract, telling him that Taejin has recognized his talent and is willing to offer him a job contract with a signing bonus of 100 million and a high monthly salary if he agrees to work for him. Ju-hyun thinks about the offer for all of 2 seconds before turning it down because he never wants to work for Taejin again under any circumstances. Masako tells him to think about this carefully because if Ju-hyun refuses this offer, then Taejin might come after him or the people he cares about directly. This is clearly meant to be a threat, but Ju-hyun doesn't feel all that threatened. In fact, he offers to show Masako what a real threat looks like as he takes out the sandglass. Masako laughs and says Ju-hyun must be bluffing because there's no way he'd use a relic in such a crowded restaurant. But Ju-hyun never really cared about keeping relics a secret from the public, so being in public won't stop him. Once Masako realizes Ju-hyun is actually serious, she shoots up from her chair in fright and takes out a relic of her own in an attempt to knock Ju-hyun out. But Ju-hyun activates the law code relic to reflect her attack back at her, and once she's knocked down, he then proceeds to use the sandglass to completely incapacitate her. A little while later, the police are called because there have been reports of a woman causing a scene and acting like a zombie at the airport, and once news of this reaches Taejin, he becomes even angrier. Now that Masako has failed, he's going to have to take matters into his own hands. Back on Ju-hyun's end, he is currently inspecting the relics he managed to get off Masako, but just then, he hears the voice of the crow in his head telling him he needs to get out of there because something seriously dangerous is approaching. Ju-hyun has no intention of obeying orders from the crow relic, especially after it went silent and hadn't shown itself since he got regressed, but the crow tells him he's going to regret it if he doesn't leave right now. Despite its warnings, Ju-hyun continues trying to argue with the crow to figure out what its goal is, but just then, Taejin appears behind Ju-hyun, and he immediately activates one of his relics on Ju-hyun's subordinates, causing them immense pain, all to demonstrate the kind of power he holds. Ju-hyun immediately takes out his knife and runs behind Taejin before holding the blade to his neck. Taejin is impressed with how well Ju-hyun knows how to use relics, but he tells him he's way out of his depth and begins charging up another dominance attack, forcing Ju-hyun to retreat. However, all of a sudden, even though Taejin is still trying to attack, he can't use the power anymore, and the reason is that while Ju-hyun was behind Taejin earlier, he used his pickpocketing skills to steal the relics in Taejin's front pocket, and these are some god-grade consumable relics, but Ju-hyun doesn't have enough dominance to use them right now, so he's just going to have to save them for later. Taejin may have lost 2 of his relics, but that doesn't mean he has no options left because he's still got the Relic of Conquest, which allows him to force his enemies to submit to him. And since it's a parasitic relic, Ju-hyun has no way of knowing where it is on Taejin's body, so he can't pickpocket it. To make matters worse, Taejin also happens to be wearing an armor relic, which makes him incredibly durable, so trying to take him out immediately isn't going to work. Ju-hyun tries to warn Taejin that if he uses such a powerful relic now, then everyone is going to find out about relics, which wouldn't be good for him. Taejin admits that he doesn't want people to find out about the relics, so he will probably have to do a lot of covering up here. But this is still way better than letting an annoying pest like Ju-hyun get in his way. Taejin then activates the Relic of Conquest on Ju-hyun and his friends, and it forces them to their knees. But in the middle of the whole thing, the crow inside Ju-hyun suddenly appears and calls Taejin a fool for using such a powerful relic in a location like this. She tells him to stop immediately before he ends up awakening the jackal and dog relics. But the second Taejin hears the word relics, he gets excited and ignores everything the crow just said, saying he will claim all the relics here after dealing with Ju-hyun. And since he is clearly way too arrogant to heed her warning, the crow disappears back into Ju-hyun's body so she won't have to deal with what happens next. Taejin continues using the Relic of Conquest on Ju-hyun, but all of a sudden, the ground begins to shake, which startles Taejin since he has no idea what's going on. Since he has stopped using his relic, Ju-hyun and the others are able to get back on their feet. But just when they thought it was their chance to escape, Ju-hyun suddenly receives a notification telling him that several ancient Egyptian pathogens are trying to invade his body and an unknown force is bearing down on him. Moments later, a massive Egyptian tomb world begins manifesting around them, and Ju-hyun recalls reading one of the prophecies which said a great calamity was coming. He hadn't expected it to be so soon, but after what just happened, there's no mistaking it. The Great Tumification has begun. Soon asks Ju-hyun what's going on, and to put it simply, Ju-hyun tells him they are cooked because Taejin just kicked off one of the greatest tomb calamities in the world. Right now, there are probably countless tombs popping up all over the world just like this one, but before Ju-hyun could say anything more, he was suddenly interrupted by an ear-piercing scream from the relic Set, the Egyptian god of deserts, darkness, and destruction. Set is soon joined by Anubis and Osiris in the form of a talking necklace, and Ju-hyun is amazed that there are 3 god-grade relics all in one place. Osiris is infuriated by the fact that mere humans would dare to disturb their slumber, but Set is convinced that it must be nothing more than a coincidence since he refuses to believe that humans would possess that kind of power. But just then, he picks up a familiar scent and starts sniffing around, trying to figure out what it is. Anubis and Osiris ask him what he's doing, so he tells them he smells the scent of that traitorous crow that sided with the humans on Ju-hyun. But the others don't think that's possible, since the crow was sealed away a long time ago. Regardless, Set plans to kill these humans for disturbing him, and the second Ju-hyun hears him say that, he takes out the Lost Stone and activates it so he can defend himself. Set laughs at him because he can't believe Ju-hyun thinks a low-level relic like that is enough to stand up to a god-level relic like him. But as Set fires a blast at Ju-hyun, because of the way the Lost Stone's ability works, the full force of Set's blast is sent right back towards him. And Ju-hyun now mocks Set for being simple-minded enough to judge a relic solely based on its rank. However, the Lost Stone only works on attacks directed towards Ju-hyun, so when Anubis decides to put Ju-hyun through his trial instead, Ju-hyun has no counter for that and ends up falling right in. The next thing he knows, he finds himself on a scale where he is being weighed against a feather. He assumes this must be part of Anubis's trial, but he doesn't seem too worried about it, because he happened to meet the user of the Anubis relic in his past life. And he was told that the trial was really easy because all you need to do is answer yes to all of the questions you are asked and you'll pass. A moment later, Anubis begins asking questions, but Ju-hyun's confidence quickly fades because the rules say he has to answer yes without lying, but he's getting asked questions like, have you never stolen? Have you never lied? And is Kashimo top 10 in the verse? Obviously, Ju-hyun can't answer yes to any of these questions without lying, so Anubis grabs him and tells him he has failed the test. As punishment, he is now going to be thrown down into the depths of hell within the labyrinth, and Ju-hyun can do nothing but struggle in vain as Anubis tosses him in. As Ju-hyun lands, he is surprised to see that he is still alive. But that doesn't mean he's safe down here because this place looks like a desolate wasteland with countless corpses scattered all over the place. And Ju-hyun soon finds out the reason for all the corpses, because a horde of deadly mummies suddenly appear and start charging towards him. Since Ju-hyun is still technically within Anubis's trial, he isn't allowed to use his relics in here, meaning the only thing he can do to defend himself is pick up an old bone nearby and try to use it as a weapon. The whole point of this must be because Anubis wants to watch his victims suffer as they try to survive in an unwinnable situation like this, and Ju-hyun doesn't want to give Anubis the satisfaction of watching him die here. But low-key, Ju-hyun doesn't have much of a choice, since there's not much he can do with a bone, and it's not long before he gets overwhelmed. However, just as he's about to face his certain demise, All of a sudden, the crow manifests in front of Ju-hyun to save his ass, and she tells him he had better be grateful because she doesn't like personally intervening like this. She then begins using her power to get Ju-hyun out of this mess, and meanwhile, on the outside, the others watch as the sphere of Anubis' trial floats in the middle of the room. Set and Osiris are both starting to get a little worried since the trial has been going on for an awfully long time now, and it shouldn't be taking Anubis this long to take care of one measly human. But just then, the trial chamber begins to crack, and they are all left in shock when they see this because nothing like this has ever happened before. Before long, the trial chamber is completely shattered, and Ju-hyun is released alongside the crow. Anubis also returns, but he was knocked out by the crow's power and is currently still unconscious. Osiris doesn't understand what happened, but Set tells him the relic-eating crow must have overpowered him in the trial, and he curses the crow for siding with the humans and joining forces with them to steal the power of relics all those years ago. This is the first. Ju-hyun is hearing about any of this, so he asks the crow if it's all true, and she doesn't say anything, but she doesn't deny it either, which tells Ju-hyun that it's probably true. Set refuses to let the crow get away, so he activates his power and summons an infinite army of undead mummies to fight Ju-hyun in an attempt to overwhelm him. As Ju-hyun faces the mummies, the crow tells him he's on his own with this one since she can't help him anymore, and Ju-hyun tells her that's fine since he wasn't planning on relying on any more of her power anyway. The crow is surprised by how confident Ju-hyun sounds, even though he's about to face god-tier relics and nearly died to one a few seconds ago. But Ju-hyun tells her that was different, because in there, he could use his relics to defend himself. But out here, he's at full liberty to use all of his power, so this much should be no problem for him. He then takes out his katana and begins slicing the mummies up one after another. Meanwhile, in the back of the mummy crowd, Set has disguised all three of them as mummies to prevent Ju-hyun from finding them, and he is certain that it's only a matter of time before Ju-hyun is defeated, because it doesn't matter how many mummies Ju-hyun defeats since they will infinitely spawn as long as Set is alive. Ju-hyun soon realizes that the mummies are infinite because killing them one after another has gotten him nowhere, so he decides to switch tactics and target the relics directly. However, he has no idea where the relics are, so he's going to need to get creative if he wants to find them. Just then, Ju-hyun recalls that the funeral knife he owns is also an Egyptian relic, so it might have some connection to the others, and sure enough, as soon as he summons the knife, it says it can sense the presence of Lord Set nearby. So Ju-hyun asks it to lead the way while he continues slicing through the mummies. Meanwhile, on the Egyptian relic's end, Anubis has just woken up, and the others are glad to see that he has finally regained consciousness, but he's a little confused about what's going on. So he asks them what happened. The others explain that the crow appeared, and Anubis is shocked to learn that she was unsealed. But just then, Ju-hyun manages to locate Anubis and the others at the back of the mummy crowd, and now that he knows where they are, he wastes no time slicing Set in half, as well as Osiris, destroying them both. He also severely injures Anubis, but he doesn't outright kill him because he actually wants to keep Anubis alive so he can retake the trial to clear this tomb. But this time, he's going to change the rules a bit. After forcing Anubis to redo the trial, Ju-hyun appears on the scales yet again, but this time, since Anubis is so badly injured, his form in the trial is weak and frail. He is about to ask the first question, but before he could say anything, Ju-hyun grabs him by the throat and tells him he doesn't get to decide what the questions are going to be anymore. Instead, Ju-hyun forces him to ask only questions which he can truthfully answer yes to, such as, "Have you ever stolen?" and "Have you ever lied?" And by doing this, Ju-hyun is easily able to pass the trial and claim ownership of the Anubis relic. Back in the real world, since the trial has been passed, the tomb disappears and everything goes back to normal. Taejun is shocked because he never imagined Ju-hyun would have what it takes to tame a god-tier relic so easily, but he clearly did so, and moments later, Ju-hyun returns to the real world. After acquiring the Anubis relic, Ju-hyun got a massive boost to death-type relics and his tolerance stat, as well as a new title as an explorer of a great tomb. But he's not sure what the title is supposed to do. Just then, Taejun approaches Ju-hyun, and after seeing what Ju-hyun is capable of firsthand, Taejun realizes he really shouldn't make an enemy of him. So he apologizes and offers Ju-hyun a deal for the two of them to work together, because he's sure that they could easily rule the new relic-filled world. But Ju-hyun already hates Taejun's guts more than anything in the world, and seeing Taejun offer him a deal gives him flashbacks to his past. So Ju-hyun does the only reasonable thing to do in a situation like this and uses his sword to slash Taejun's neck. Taejun's head goes flying off his body, but a moment later, his head reattaches itself to his body, which is a little surprising to Ju-hyun. He realizes that Taejin must have the Achilles heel relic somehow, which is what's granting him this form of immortality. But considering the legend behind the artifact, Ju-hyun is sure there must be a weakness he can exploit. Taejin assumes Ju-hyun must have given up on attacking him after realizing that he has an immortality relic, so he once again asks him to consider joining forces and working for him. But that's the last thing Ju-hyun would ever do. He may not know where the weak point on his body may be right now, but he sure as hell isn't going to let Taejin win, so he charges the Muramasa sword to full strength and begins slashing at Taejin repeatedly to try and wear down the immortality. Eventually, Ju-hyun does so much damage that Muramasa snaps in half, and the Achilles heel relic begins to react on its own, sending a blast of energy towards Ju-hyun. Ju-hyun takes out the Law Stone in an attempt to block the attack, but all the energy is starting to crack the Law Stone, so he activates its ability to redirect the blast back towards Taejin, knocking him out and sending him flying into the wall. Ju-hyun is a bit annoyed that Taejin is still alive after all that, but the Achilles relic must have healed the majority of the damage he suffered. Even so, there's no way the Achilles and Conquest relics haven't been damaged after an exchange like that, so Ju-hyun is sure Taejin won't be able to use them for a while. That said, the same goes for him since Muramasa is completely destroyed, and the Law Stone is damaged as well. He's going to need to get them fixed if he wants to keep using them, so he gets on the phone with Irene and asks her to help him find a guy named Yanagi Kotaru. Irene agrees to use her connections to search for him, but unfortunately, when Ju-hyun later meets up with her to find out what she managed to find, she informs him that Yanagi is already dead. Ju-hyun is shocked to hear this, but Irene explains that her brother happens to be an avid art collector, and he recently bought a painting from Yanagi, but that painting turned out to be a fake. And when Irene's brother and his friends were chasing after Yanagi to get him to pay for scamming them, Yanagi ended up driving through a guardrail and plummeting off the side of a cliff. Ju-hyun really wasn't expecting this. He's pretty sure Yanagi did scam Irene's brother since, in the future, Yanagi was known as the king of frauds, but he was also a restoration relic user. Relics can be damaged or destroyed in all sorts of ways, but people with restoration relics are able to fix them fairly easily. Ju-hyun would have just gotten a restoration relic for himself if he could, but those kinds of relics are usually works of art and require high affinity to use, so a dominance build like him isn't capable of using one. He has no idea what he's going to do now, but just then, he realizes something. He remembers meeting Yanagi 5 years from now in the future, and he hasn't interacted with him yet, so the future couldn't have changed that much, which means Yanagi must be faking his death to get away from Irene's brother. And if that's the case, then all he needs to do is find wherever Yanagi is hiding. Meanwhile, over in a hospital room, Taejin is watching a news report about the recent incident at the airport, and it's pretty clear that the public is starting to catch on to the existence of relics. He's really upset about this because he says he put a lot of effort into making sure the truth about relics stays a secret. But Edward reminds him that not only did he make a big spectacle using his most powerful relics at the airport, but he also managed to trigger a tomb spawning in the process, so it's no wonder that people figured out what relics were. Taejin says the tomb wasn't his fault because he couldn't have anticipated that there would be 3 god-grade relics buried there. But that aside, Edward is still surprised that Taejin ended up getting so beat up despite the fact that he had an immortality relic on him at the time. Taejin says he doesn't want to talk about that right now, and Edward agrees to drop the subject, but he mentions that Taejin is probably going to need a restorer to fix his relics after a fight like that, so he offers to get in contact with one for him. And after that, he leaves Taejin to rest up in his hospital room while Taejin is still fuming over how much Ju-hyun humiliated him. As he is walking through the halls, Edward places a call to Yanagi, and Yanagi answers right away, which surprises Edward at first, since Yanagi is never this eager for a job, but he assumes he must just be in desperate need of some quick cash. Yanagi admits that he does need the money since he got into a bit of trouble while trying to pass off a fake painting, so he needed to fake his death, and now he's got to lay low for a while to avoid being found out. He also needs to pay a bunch of hush money to the people who are keeping him hidden, and Edward tells him money shouldn't be a problem since Taejin is a big client. Meanwhile, on Ju-hyun's end, he figured out that Yanagi must be having someone cover for him, so he has Irene look into the art shops of all his close friends, and after searching for a while, they narrow the options down to one shop in particular. They head in, and they are greeted by the receptionist, who asks them what art piece they are interested in looking at today, but Ju-hyun responds and tells her they aren't here to buy any art, but rather, they were hoping she could help him fix up his relics. The woman freezes up for a second when Ju-hyun mentions relics, but then she gets back into character and pretends she has no idea what he's talking about. Sung slams his hand on the front desk and tells her to drop the act already, because they know exactly what this place is, but Ju-hyun pulls him away and tells him to tone it down because they are trying to get the lady to accept their request. While the two of them are arguing, the lady happens to glance into the bag they brought with them, and she is amazed when she sees so many high-ranking relics just sitting there. Ju-hyun sees her reaction and decides to roll with it, explaining that he heard from a friend that he'd be able to restore his relics here, and they are very important to him. So he'd like to get it taken care of by a professional. Now that she knows Ju-hyun has high-grade relics, the lady changes her tune and tells him to wait a moment while she goes to confirm something in the back. This is exactly what Ju-hyun was hoping for, since if that lady is Yanagi's secretary, she must be calling him right now to tell him about the relics, since he's the only one who could handle relics of this grade. Just as Ju-hyun expected, the lady was indeed on the phone with Yanagi, and Yanagi was surprised to learn that someone would have that many relics on hand. But the secretary adds that Ju-hyun seemed pretty clueless about the true worth of the relics, so they might be able to get away with scamming him. A moment later, the lady returns from the back room and tells Ju-hyun that they'll be able to take a look at his relics for him, but she's going to need to take all of them to the technician in the back. Ju-hyun is surprised to hear her say this since he knew she worked with Yanagi, but he didn't think Yanagi would be in the store in person. He agrees to let her take the relics to the back, and when she brings them to Yanagi, he is delighted because he will be able to make a fortune selling these after he scams Ju-hyun. His secretary asks him if he's sure this is a good idea since she's worried scamming someone as powerful as Ju-hyun will come back to bite them. But Yanagi says it's fine since he can create perfect duplicates, so Ju-hyun won't be able to tell the difference until he's long gone. Yanagi also happens to be in possession of a duplication relic, which is how he gained the title of the King of Frauds, and with it, he is able to make an indistinguishable copy of anything, including relics, though the copies only last for half a day before they disappear. After Yanagi is done duplicating all of Ju-hyun's relics, he has the secretary take the fakes back to Ju-hyun, assuming he won't notice the difference. But Ju-hyun was already expecting these to be fakes, and now that he knows for certain that Yanagi is back there, he takes off running into the back of the store while Seung and the others hold the secretary back. A few moments later, Ju-hyun barges into the room Yanagi was hiding in, and before Yanagi has a chance to react, he uses his rope relic to tie him up and tells him he'd like to make a deal with him. But Yanagi is too hysterical right now to pay attention to anything Ju-hyun has to say. Ju-hyun knows quite a bit about Yanagi, and Yanagi wasn't always like this. He used to be a promising art student and was so good that he was even offered a scholarship to a prestigious art university. But it all went downhill for him when, at one point, his work was stolen by his teacher, a man named Gene Richards. And to make matters worse, after that, Yanagi was framed as the plagiarist, causing him to be kicked out of the art world altogether. So he was forced to put his talents to other, more illegal uses if he wanted to get by. Ju-hyun knows Yanagi isn't a bad guy at heart, but he certainly is annoying when he's screaming at the top of his lungs like this. Ju-hyun needs to get him to shut up if he wants to make a deal with him, so he takes out the Shakespeare's pen relic and informs Yanagi that anything he writes down becomes reality with this pen, and proceeds to write that if Yanagi does not cooperate with him, he will experience the worst testicular torsion known to mankind. A little while later, Ju-hyun has gotten Yanagi to sign a contract made with the Lost Stone, and now he won't be able to betray him. Yanagi can't believe he is going to be stuck as Ju-hyun's slave from now on. But Ju-hyun points out that this isn't a slave contract, and he made sure the terms were relatively fair, with a $6,000 base fee and bonuses whenever he repairs a god-tier relic. But regardless of how fair his terms are, he can't exactly trust Yanagi to handle repairing his god-tier relics until he can get Yanagi to trust him as well. He decides to try getting to know each other and introduces himself to Yanagi. But Yanagi doesn't feel like introducing himself right now. So Ju-hyun goes on to mention that he heard a rumor that Yanagi was kicked out of art school for plagiarizing his teacher's work, but hearing this sends Yanagi into a rage because he is adamant that he didn't plagiarize anything. He has no idea what happened, and it would be one thing if his teacher copied the works he had already created, but he somehow even managed to copy paintings that Yanagi had only thought about, and it has been driving him crazy ever since. After hearing that, Ju-hyun tells Yanagi that it might be possible that his teacher used a relic to steal his ideas from his mind, and when Yanagi hears this, it all finally makes sense to him. He immediately runs out of the room, and Seung and the others try to chase after him, but Ju-hyun tells them to let Yanagi go because he has a good idea of where he's heading, and it's better if he finds out how the world works by himself. Now that Yanagi knows that Richard used a relic to steal his talents, all he needs to do is take the relic from him. He goes straight to Taejin's office and offers to become his exclusive relic restorer in exchange for him helping him take Richard's relic. But unfortunately for Yanagi, Taejin happens to be good buddies with Richard, so he doesn't intend to help Yanagi take the relic from him. But he also doesn't intend to let Yanagi leave, so he orders his bodyguards to start beating him up until he submits. However, before Yanagi could get the shit kicked out of him, Julian jumps in to help because he had been following Yanagi expecting this to happen, and after a situation like this, he is sure Yanagi will want to work with him more than Taejin.